Welcome to Greek for a Week. I'm glad that you have decided to view this week's video. And this week we start chapter 2 of the book of Philippians. It's a pretty important chapter, as many of us know. We're going to eventually get to the passage that I'm sure a lot of people have questions and just an overall appreciation for how Paul puts together specifically chapter 2 verses 5 through 11. But obviously before we get there, we have to look at verses 1 through 4. So we will be doing that for the next couple of weeks. But this week, 1 through 2. So the first two verses of chapter 2 we'll look at. Let me translate them. Again, we'll mention a few things by way of grammar and syntax and just different things that, again, help us bring the text together. How does Paul use various pieces of grammar to bring these two verses together? So give me just a minute here and we'll translate and then we'll move forward. So here's verse 1 and here is verse 2. Paul begins with, therefore, if there's any consolation in Christ. If any consolation of love. If any fellowship of the Spirit. If any affection and compassion. Fulfill my joy, that you have the same mind, having the same love, united in spirit, thinking one thing. Again, several things that we could mention here. You'll notice that we have at the beginning of verse 1, we have an which helps us note there is a first-class conditional clause that assumes the reality of the condition for the sake of argument. And I know sometimes when we have the word we want to translate it since. And I think in agreement with several commentaries that would suggest it's better to communicate if, just for the rhetorical effect of what Paul's trying to write throughout verse 1. So I would leave it as if. So if, in other words, he's saying really, if there's any consolation or encouragement in Christ, and then he brings all of these various conditional clauses that then eventually have the then portion or the apodosis then that follows in verse 2. You have an which is a conjunction. I would probably categorize this as a resumptive conjunction or a resumptive that points back to verse 27. Probably the imperative there in verse 27 where you have the imperative, conducting your life worthy of the gospel. If there's any consolation, then you have in Christ. So you have a prepositional phrase there, en plus the dative, Christo. Again, probably providing this intimate feel or this intimate relationship. I think that's how I would see the function of en here. Consolation in this relationship with Christ. Then you have consolation of love. Okay, consolation of love here. You could translate that as a genitive of source to suggest the agapes here would be a genitive of source. So it could be the consolation from love would be a way to handle that. Then you have koinonia pneumatos. Okay, koinonia pneumatos. Probably here the pneumatos in objective genitive. You could translate that participation in or fellowship in the Spirit. And then lastly, the two final words, the splagna and the oiktimoi. That would be, there's your affection and compassion. You've probably heard of the term hendiades, which would basically bring those two terms together. Instead of saying affection and compassion, you can just simply say compassionate mercy. So that basically be bringing those two words together. On to verse 2 quickly, you have the plerosate. Okay, here is your first word of verse 2. Second person plural. You have a sate ending. Okay, and because you do not have any augment on the prefix or serving as a prefix here, you're looking at an imperative. Second person plural, aorist, active imperative. Then you have your hina probably functioning here. Hina not as purpose, but probably functioning as an introduction to the substantive clause that eventually defines what his joy is. And that would be, again, having the same mind, the same love, and united in spirit and thinking one thing. So all of this moving this direction would help define what fulfilling the joy would be. Then you have phronete. Okay, here is my subjunctive, and it's going to be a subjunctive because of the hina. And I realize I'm going through these rather quickly here, so give me just one more minute here. The ekantes and your phronuntes. Both of those would be participles, present active participles, masculine nominative plural of the word echo and the word phroneo, and I would contend both of those are participles of means. The means by which Paul's joy is fulfilled is having the same love and thinking one thing. Again, quite a bit there in verses 1 and 2 of chapter 2. Trust it's been helpful for you. We will look at verses 3 and 4 next week. And then, of course, the following week, we will diagram the passage of 1 through 4. Have a great week, guys. Again, thanks for listening. Appreciate it.